I found out my husband's biggest secret because a prison guard whispered just 5 words to me in a hallway that smelled like bleach and rust. "Ma'am, you don't belong here." At first I thought he was confused, that he'd mistaken me for someone else, because I was there to visit my husband, the man I had trusted for 11 years, the man who told me he was working late, traveling, sacrificing everything for our future. But that guard's eyes weren't confused. They were sorry. And in that moment, before he said anything else, my stomach dropped so violently it felt like my body already knew the truth my mind hadn't caught up to yet. If you've ever trusted someone so completely that you built your whole life around them, then you know exactly how it feels when that trust cracks. So before we go further, take a second to like and subscribe, because stories like this remind us that sometimes the quietest warnings save us from the loudest betrayals. My name is Rebecca, and this is the story of how one quiet warning exposed my husband and how I made sure he lost everything he tried to hide from me. I used to believe my life was stable. Not perfect, not glamorous, but steady in that comforting, predictable way that feels safe. Ethan and I met when I was 26. He was charming in that calm, dependable way, not flashy, not overly romantic, just solid. He listened when I spoke. He remembered small things. He made me feel like I mattered. We married after 2 years, bought a modest house with a white fence that needed repainting every summer, built routines that felt like proof of loyalty. Morning coffee together, Sunday grocery trips, quiet evenings where he'd sit beside me on the couch, scrolling through his phone while my head rested on his shoulder. He wasn't affectionate in a dramatic way, but I told myself that meant he was steady, reliable, safe, and I trusted him completely. That trust didn't shatter all at once. It eroded slowly, like something chewing through wood from the inside. It started with work. Ethan's job supposedly shifted. He began traveling more, long overnight assignments, sudden schedule changes, late returns that smelled like unfamiliar cologne and stale air. When I asked questions, he had answers ready. Always calm. Always believable. "You know how my boss is. Deadlines changed last minute. I'm doing this for us." And I believed him, because loving someone makes you want to believe them. But there were little things that never sat right. He guarded his phone more closely. He stopped sharing details about work. Sometimes he'd stare at me strangely, like he was calculating something. One night I woke up at 2 a.m. and found him sitting in the living room, staring at the dark TV screen. Not watching, just staring. "Ethan," I whispered. He jumped slightly, too much for someone just thinking. "Go back to bed," he said softly. I couldn't sleep. I remember lying awake afterward, listening to his footsteps packing the house. That was the first night I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not suspicion exactly. Just a quiet sense that my life wasn't as simple as I believed. Still, I pushed it away, because the alternative was too painful to consider. Months passed. Then came the day everything shifted. I got a phone call from an unfamiliar number. A clipped voice said, "Are you Rebecca Lawson?" "Yes. You're listed as an emergency contact for Ethan Lawson. He's been detained. You'll need to come down to the facility to discuss visitation." Detained. The word hit like a physical blow. I remember my hands shaking so badly, I dropped the phone twice trying to grab my keys. The drive felt surreal. Like the world outside my windshield had muted colors, like I was watching my own life from far away. I kept telling myself there had to be a mistake. Maybe a traffic incident. A misunderstanding. A paperwork error. Anything but something serious. But when I pulled into the parking lot, I saw the razor wire. The grey walls. The uniformed guards. This wasn't a police station. It was a prison intake facility. My knees nearly buckled as I walked inside. The air smelled sterile, cold, metallic. A guard at the desk asked for my ID. He scanned it, looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. Then he said quietly, "Follow me," His tone wasn't hostile. It wasn't neutral either. It carried something heavier. Pity. He led me down a narrow corridor with flickering fluorescent lights. My footsteps echoed too loudly, my heartbeat thudded in my ears. Then suddenly he stopped, turned slightly toward me, lowered his voice, and said the words that changed everything. "Ma'am, you don't belong here." I frowned, confused. "I'm here to see my husband." His jaw tightened. There was a long pause, like he was debating whether to say more. Finally, he leaned closer and whispered, "You've been lied to." And then he walked away before I could ask anything else. I stood frozen in that hallway, my mind scrambling. Lied to? About what? Why would a stranger say something like that? My chest felt tight, my hands went cold. And when they finally brought Ethan into the visitation room, the truth began spilling out in ways I never could have imagined. Because the man sitting across from me wasn't the husband I thought I knew. And in the next few minutes, he would reveal a secret so devastating, it would destroy every memory of our marriage. And that was only the beginning. Because what I learned afterward would lead me into a plan so meticulous, so precise, that by the time Ethan realized what I was doing, it was already too late. When Ethan sat down across from me in that visitation booth, the first thing I noticed was his eyes. Not relief. Not embarrassment. Not even fear. They were calculating. Like he was already planning what version of the truth he was about to sell me. A thick glass panel separated us, the kind that makes every breath sound too loud, every movement feel trapped. I picked up the phone receiver with trembling fingers. "So," I whispered, my voice already cracking, "what happened?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave me a small, almost irritated sigh, like I'd just asked an inconvenient question. "It's complicated," he said finally. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Because innocent people don't start with "it's complicated." They start with "this is a mistake." But he didn't. And suddenly, the guard's whisper echoed in my head. "You've been lied to." My throat tightened. "Then explain it," I said. He leaned back in his chair, calm, too calm. "They arrested me for financial fraud," he said flatly. The words didn't fully register at first. "Fraud," I repeated. "It's just business complications," he replied quickly. "Paperwork stuff you wouldn't understand." That sentence hit harder than the accusation itself. You wouldn't understand. The dismissal. The condescension. The casual way he reduced me to someone outside his world. My fingers tightened around the receiver. "How long has this been going on?" He hesitated. And in that hesitation, I felt the floor of my life tilt. "A few years," he admitted. "A few years." My stomach dropped so violently I thought I might faint. Years. Which meant all those late nights. All those trips. All those work emergencies. None of them were what he told me. "What did you do?" I whispered. He rubbed his forehead like he was annoyed by the conversation. "I moved money around. Investors lost some funds. It wasn't supposed to blow up like this." "Investors lost funds." My skin went cold. "How much?" I asked. Another pause. Then quietly, "Millions." The word hit like a bomb detonating inside my chest. Millions. My husband, the man who clipped coupons and complained about electricity bills, had secretly been moving millions of dollars. My breathing became shallow. "Why didn't you tell me?" He finally looked me in the eyes. And what I saw there made something inside me crack permanently. Because there was no remorse. No shame. Only impatience. "You panic over small things," he said. "I didn't need you interfering." Interfering. Like I was an obstacle in his life. Not his wife. Not his partner. Just something to manage. My vision blurred with tears. Do you understand what this means for us? I asked. He shrugged slightly. Not really, my lawyers will handle it. Then he leaned forward and lowered his voice. Listen carefully, Rebecca, you need to stay calm. Don't talk to anyone, don't ask questions, and don't let anyone look into our finances. Our finances. The words slammed into me. Because suddenly I understood what the guard meant. I felt a cold wave of dread crawl up my spine. What finances? I whispered. Ethan's expression tightened. Just trust me, he said. Everything is under control. That was when I knew. Nothing was under control. And whatever he'd done, he'd involved me. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart racing. Pieces of my past started rearranging themselves into something horrifying. Why he insisted on putting accounts in my name. Why he asked me to sign documents without explaining. Why he always handled taxes alone. At the time it felt like convenience. Now it felt like a trap. By morning, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called a lawyer. I didn't tell Ethan. I didn't tell anyone. I just needed to know one thing. Was I in danger? The lawyer reviewed the documents I brought. Bank statements, property records, investment accounts. He went silent for a long time. Then he looked up at me with a grave expression. Mrs. Lawson, he said carefully, do you know that most of these assets are registered solely under your name? My heart stopped. What? He slid papers toward me. Highlighted sections. Signatures. Mines. Everywhere. He used you as a legal shield, the lawyer said quietly. If investigators traced the money, you could be held responsible. The room started spinning. I felt like I couldn't breathe. You mean I could go to prison? His silence was the answer. In that moment, something inside me shattered completely. Not just my trust in Ethan, but my sense of safety, my identity, my entire life. Because the man I loved hadn't just lied to me. He had built a plan that would sacrifice me to save himself. I walked out of that office feeling hollow. Like my chest was full of broken glass. Every memory of our marriage replayed differently now. Every smile. Every I'm doing this for us. Every time he told me to trust him. It had all been manipulation. And the worst part, he never intended for me to find out. I wasn't his partner. I was his insurance policy. That night I sat alone in the dark living room. The house felt different now. Hostile. Every corner filled with hidden truths. I realized something slowly, painfully. If I did nothing, I would go down with him. He would let me. Without hesitation. And in that realization, grief turned into something else. Something colder. Something sharper. Not anger. Not yet. But clarity. For the first time in 11 years, I saw Ethan exactly as he was. And once you see someone clearly, you can't unsee them. That was the moment my fear began transforming into something dangerous. Because I understood something he didn't. He thought I was weak. Dependent. Naive. He had underestimated me completely. And that mistake would cost him everything. Because I wasn't going to save him. I wasn't going to protect him. I wasn't going to stay silent. I was going to do something far more devastating. I was going to make sure the truth destroyed him. The same way it had destroyed me. And that night, sitting in the darkness with tears drying on my cheeks, I began planning. But before I could take a single step, I had to survive what came next. Because within days, investigators would start knocking on my door. And when they did, I would have to make the most dangerous decision of my life. Whether to keep being Ethan's victim, or become the architect of his downfall. And once I made that choice, there would be no turning back. 3 days later, the knock came. Not gentle, not hesitant. 3 firm strikes that echoed through the house like a warning. I knew who it was before I even reached the door. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like it might shake my ribs apart. For a split second I froze. Because once I opened that door, my life would never be the same again. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans and pulled it open. 2 federal investigators stood on the porch. Dark suits, neutral expressions, eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Rebecca Lawson, one asked. My throat was dry. Yes. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding your husband. The words felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. But I stepped aside and let them in. Because deep down, I already knew this moment was inevitable. They sat across from me in the living room. The same room where Ethan and I used to watch movies. Where we celebrated anniversaries. Where he once told me I was the most important person in his life. Now it felt like a courtroom. Every second stretched painfully. Mrs. Lawson, the older investigator, began, "Are you aware of the financial activities connected to accounts in your name?" My chest tightened. I remembered the lawyer's warning. Choose carefully. One wrong move and you could be implicated. I swallowed. I signed documents my husband asked me to, I said honestly, but I didn't know what they were for. They exchanged a look. Not suspicious, not hostile, but assessing. Your husband transferred large sums through entities registered to you, the second investigator said. Do you know why? The question hit like a blade. Because now I knew the answer. He used me. As a shield. As a scapegoat. As someone disposable. The realization still burned like acid in my chest. I trusted him, I whispered. The older investigator leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Lawson, we need to know if you were complicit, or if you were a victim. Victim. The word echoed in my head. For 11 years I'd thought of myself as a partner. Now I was being asked to define myself in a single brutal word. Victim. My fingers curled tightly in my lap. And in that moment, something inside me hardened completely. Because I finally understood something clearly. Ethan had already chosen. He chose to sacrifice me. To protect himself. He never saw me as equal. Never saw me as someone he owed honesty. So why should I protect him? I looked the investigator in the eye. And said quietly, I want to cooperate. The air in the room shifted instantly. The investigator's posture changed. Less formal. More focused. Tell us everything you know, they said. And that's when the turning point of my life began. For hours I told them everything. Every document he asked me to sign. Every unexplained trip. Every suspicious moment I'd ignored. Every financial record my lawyer helped me gather. It felt like ripping open wounds. But also strangely empowering. Because for the first time I wasn't reacting. I was taking control. When they finally left, the sun had already set. The house was dark. Silent. But something inside me felt different. Not lighter. But steadier. For the first time since that prison hallway, I didn't feel powerless. I felt focused. Because now I knew the truth. And more importantly, I knew something Ethan didn't. He still believed I would stay loyal. Still believed I was too afraid to fight back. Still believed I would protect him. And that misunderstanding was about to become his greatest mistake. The next week was a blur of strategy. Meetings with lawyers. calls with investigators, stacks of paperwork. I learned things about Ethan that made my stomach twist. He hadn't just committed fraud. He had manipulated dozens of people, ruined families, destroyed retirement savings, lied without hesitation, and worst of all, he had already planned his defense. Through his lawyer, he was preparing to claim that I was responsible, that I managed the accounts, that I knowingly signed everything, that I was the one controlling the money. The betrayal hit deeper than anything before. He wasn't just abandoning me. He was actively trying to frame me. That night I sat alone in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee. My mind replayed every memory of him, every laugh, every promise, every moment I believed he loved me. It all felt like a carefully constructed illusion, and something inside me finally snapped. Not into rage, but into something colder. Resolve, because I realized something clearly. If I didn't act, he would destroy my life and walk away free. But if I played this right, I could do something far more powerful. I could make sure he lost everything, not just legally, but socially, emotionally, completely. That was the moment my plan truly began. The investigators gave me access to evidence they were collecting. Transaction histories, emails, hidden accounts, patterns of fraud. But what they didn't know was that I had something even more valuable, something Ethan never imagined could be used against him. Our homes, our routines, his habits, his arrogance. Because Ethan had one fatal flaw. He believed he was smarter than everyone, especially me. And that arrogance meant he'd made mistakes. Small ones, careless ones, the kind only someone who lived with him could notice. And I knew exactly where to look. It started with his office, a room he rarely let me enter, always locked when he wasn't home. I used to respect that boundary. Now I saw it differently. I found the spare key hidden in the garage toolbox, exactly where he always kept backups. When I opened that door, the air inside smelled stale, unused. But beneath that, something else lingered. Secrets. I searched methodically. Drawers, bookshelves, hidden compartments. For hours I found nothing. Then I noticed something strange. One bookshelf had scratch marks on the floor beneath it, like it had been moved often. My pulse quickened. I pushed it aside. Behind it was a small wall safe. My hands trembled as I stared at it, because suddenly I understood. This was where Ethan kept the truth he trusted no one else with. And if I could open it, I might find the final piece needed to destroy him completely. I sat on the floor in front of that safe for a long time, heart racing, mind spinning, because I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was inside that safe would change everything. And once I opened it, there would be no going back. I took a deep breath, reached forward, and began trying combinations, because I knew Ethan well enough to guess. His birthday, our anniversary, numbers he thought were meaningful. It took 32 tries. But when the lock finally clicked open, the sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. And what I found inside made my hands start shaking uncontrollably. Because it wasn't just financial records. It was something far worse. Something that would ensure Ethan didn't just lose his case, but his entire identity. And in that moment, staring at those documents, I realized my revenge wouldn't just be legal. It would be absolute. Inside the safe there were two things: stacks of cash and a thick black folder. At first the cash barely registered. It was bundled in tight, rubber-banded bricks, more money than I had ever seen in one place in my life. The sight of it should have shocked me. But it didn't, because the folder beside it pulled my attention immediately. My instincts told me that was the real secret. My hands were trembling as I opened it. Inside were printed emails, legal contracts, photographs, and then a document that made my stomach drop so violently I had to grab the floor to steady myself. It was a prepared statement, typed neatly, with Ethan's signature at the bottom. A confession, but not his. Mine. My name was written throughout it, claiming I had orchestrated the fraud, that I managed the accounts, that I acted without his knowledge, that he was an innocent husband betrayed by his own wife. My vision blurred. My ears rang. He had already written my downfall. He had already planned to sacrifice me completely. There was even a handwritten note clipped to the top page. In Ethan's familiar, calm handwriting. If she cooperates, use version B. If she resists, submit version A. I felt something inside me collapse. Not in heartbreak, but in clarity. There it was. Proof that my husband didn't just lie to me. He had planned in cold detail to destroy me, to erase himself from responsibility, to paint me as the villain, to walk free while I took the blame. And in that moment, the last piece of my love for him died. Completely, silently, without drama. What replaced it wasn't rage. It was something colder, something sharper. Purpose. Because now I understood something clearly. Ethan had already declared war on me. He just didn't know it yet. I sat on that floor for a long time, holding the folder, staring at the evidence of his betrayal. My breathing slowly steadied. My hands stopped shaking. And then a strange calm settled over me. Because suddenly everything became simple. He had tried to frame me, which meant I didn't need to prove his guilt. I only needed to expose his intention. And that folder was the key. The next morning I contacted the investigators again. When I handed them the black folder, their reactions told me everything. "This changes the entire case," one of them said quietly. Because that document wasn't just evidence of fraud. It was proof of conspiracy, of intent, of obstruction of justice, and most importantly, it proved I was never his partner. I was his target. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to relief, because now legally I was safe. But emotionally, that was different, because revenge isn't just about legal justice. It's about balance, about making someone feel the weight of what they did. And I knew something about Ethan, something the investigators didn't. His greatest fear wasn't prison. It was humiliation. Control meant everything to him. His reputation, his image, his illusion of being respected. And I knew exactly how to take that from him. Weeks passed as the case moved forward. Ethan remained confident. His lawyer still believed they could argue his innocence. He still believed I would stay quiet. Still believed I was too weak to fight back. That arrogance made what happened next even more devastating. Because the day of his preliminary hearing arrived. And for the first time since his arrest, we would face each other again. The courtroom felt suffocating, cold, formal, silent except for the shuffle of papers. When Ethan walked in, he looked exactly as he always had. Calm, composed, confident. He spotted me immediately and gave me a small, reassuring nod, like we were still a team, like nothing had changed. The sight of that nod made something deep inside me go completely still, because it showed just how much he underestimated me. He still thought I was his loyal wife, his silent shield, his safety net. He had no idea what was about to happen. The hearing began. Lawyers spoke. Charges were read. Arguments presented. Ethan's attorney confidently suggested I was deeply involved in the financial operations. And then, the prosecutor stood and requested permission to submit new evidence. The judge allowed it. The black folder was placed on the evidence table. I watched Ethan's face carefully. At first he didn't react. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. Recognition flickered. And in that exact moment, I saw something I had never seen in him before. Fear. Real, raw fear. Because he knew what was inside that folder. He knew exactly what it meant. The prosecutor began reading portions aloud. The prepared statement. The handwritten instructions. The clear plan to frame me. Each word landed like a hammer. The courtroom murmured. His lawyer's confidence visibly crumbled. And Ethan. He stopped looking at anyone else. His eyes locked onto mine. Wide. Disbelieving. Desperate. Like he was silently asking, "How could you do this?" And for the first time in 11 years, I held his gaze without feeling anything at all. No love. No sadness. No hesitation. Only quiet certainty. Because in that moment, he finally understood something. I was never his victim anymore. I was the reason his world was collapsing. The judge ordered additional charges filed immediately. Conspiracy. Witness tampering. Obstruction. Bail was denied. His lawyer looked shaken. The illusion of control Ethan had clung to shattered completely in minutes. As officers moved to escort him away, he turned toward me one last time, and for the first time ever, he spoke without confidence. "Rebecca, please. Just one word. Please." It sounded small, broken, almost childlike. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. This was the emotional balance I had needed. Not revenge through anger, but through truth, through consequences, through making him face exactly what he tried to do to me. I didn't respond. I simply stood, calm, silent, watching as he was led away. And when the courtroom doors closed behind him, I felt something inside me finally release, like a chain breaking, like air filling lungs that had been suffocating for years. Freedom. Months later, Ethan was convicted on multiple charges. He received a long sentence, long enough that he would spend decades behind bars, long enough to lose everything he had built through lies. But what mattered most wasn't the prison time. It was what he lost before that. His reputation, his illusion of superiority, his control, and most importantly, his belief that he could manipulate me forever. Today I still live in the same house, but it feels different now. Not haunted, not heavy, just quiet, peaceful. Sometimes I think back to that prison hallway, to the guard's quiet whisper, "You don't belong here." He was right. I didn't belong in Ethan's world of deception. I didn't belong in his plans. And in the end, I made sure he was the only one left trapped there. If this story reminded you how important it is to trust your instincts, and how dangerous it can be to ignore quiet warnings, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Because sometimes the smallest whisper can save your life. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's truth and walking away free.